Welcome to the debate. Have you ever considered the sheer biological limits of the human brain when it comes to managing a planetary civilization,
Oh, I mean, it's something that keeps me up at night, frankly.
right? Like, imagine trying to run the entire logistics network of a modern metropolis. The traffic grids, the water pressure, the electrical substations.
Yeah. It's an incredible amount of data.
Exactly. And imagine doing all that using the processing power of, say, a single 1980s desktop computer. It would crash instantly, right?
Without a doubt. The hardware just isn't built for that level of complexity.
And yet, for millennia, we've been trying to run a vastly more complex system, global human survival, resource distribution, on biological hardware that hasn't seen a structural upgrade in hundreds of thousands of years.
That biological hardware falters. I mean, we see the system crash all the time through famine, war, supply chain collapses.
Exactly. Which brings us to the core of today's analysis. We're examining the profound societal implications of integrating cyber intelligence into global infrastructure.
Right. Drawing heavily from Professor Guy Lakeman's texts, specifically Intelligence Drives Evolution and his framework for restructuring human needs.
Yes, and the core question we're looking at today is this. Does offloading our fundamental survival structures to a cognitively augmented cyber hive brain represent the ultimate liberation of human potential, or does it introduce profound existential risks?
It's a massive question.
It is, and I will be arguing that this cyber integration is a completely necessary evolutionary step to bypass our biological limits and free humanity for higher emotional and creative pursuits.
And my position is that offloading human autonomy to a cyber brain carries unresolved contradictions and dangerous vulnerabilities, as evidenced by the text's own warnings.
Okay, so to understand why this transition isn't just, an interesting theory, but a biological imperative, we have to look at Lakeman's model for restructuring human needs.
This is his update to Maslow's pyramid, right?
Precisely. Right now, our unassisted human intelligence is biologically fixed. You cannot simply will your brain to process 10,000 global supply chain variables at once.
No matter how hard you try.
Right. And because of this limit, our current political systems, particularly Western governments, and global bodies like the UN, have critically mismanaged the base layers of that pyramid. We're trapped in what Lakeman calls competitive waste.
The bureaucratic friction of global politics.
Exactly that. We spend billions just fighting over the administration of basic resources. So, my position is that delegating this heavy lifting to a cyber intelligence hive mind is just an administrative necessity.
I see.
By handing over agriculture, energy, and infrastructure to a system that can actually compute the variables, we eliminate resource scarcity. And crucially, we eliminate the burden of time a job.
Right, the daily grind.
Yeah. When humans aren't spending 80% of their waking lives desperately trying to secure the bottom layer of the pyramid, they are finally freed to ascend to the top tiers: love, esteem, self-actualization.
Look, the promise of eliminating resource scarcity is, it's universally alluring. I mean, who wouldn't want that?
Exactly.
But I come at it from a different way. My position centers on the inherent paradoxes detailed right alongside those utopian visions in Lakeman's material.
Okay, paradoxes like what?
Well, the text envisions this hyper-acceleration in STEM, quantum computing, molecular engineering, all flawlessly managed by a cyber brain. Yet, in the same breath, Lakeman warns us that public chatbots are already showing disturbing signs of totalitarian manipulation.
Well, sure, but that's a symptom of the current paradigm, not the future one.
But the symptoms are alarming. The text explicitly calls out sales-directed co-pilots, unhelpful tyrannical help systems, and dictatorial tyrant HR systems that are active right now.
Right, undercurrent capitalist models.
Even so, to suggest we should completely hand over the base layers of human survival to machines while simultaneously dismissing anyone who opposes this as, quote, gorillas happily beating their chests, reflects a dangerous disconnect. Bypassing human struggle might not be the panacea Lakeman suggests.
I see why you think that.
But let me give you a different perspective on why the hive brain doesn't just become a superpowered tyrant. We have to look closely at what Lakeman calls the genius baseline.
Okay, let's look at it.
The source material has this highly detailed comparison table demonstrating that STEM machines already exhibit the cognitive traits of high IQ individuals. Take vector clustering in attention layers, for example.
Let's pause there. Walk me through that. We hear terms like vector clustering thrown around, but what does that actually mean for human administration?
It's about how connections are made. When a highly intelligent human solves a complex problem, they often rely on a flash of intuition. They suddenly connect two seemingly unrelated concepts.
Because they subconsciously recognize a pattern.
Exactly. Vector clustering is the cyber equivalent, but it's mathematically precise. The AI plots millions of concepts in multidimensional space and literally measures the geometric proximity between them.
So it can connect, say, global capital flow to agricultural yields?
In milliseconds, yes.
Okay, but human intuition is also frequently accompanied by human panic, especially with ambiguous data.
And that is exactly where cyber intelligence diverges from biology. Where humans panic in ambiguity, the cyber intelligence manages uncertainty through Bayesian and Markov probabilities.
Meaning it calculates the odds instead of panicking.
Far more than just calculating odds. Bayesian updating means the system constantly recalibrates the probability of an outcome every time new data arrives. It doesn't get emotionally attached to a failing policy the way a human politician does.
Right, it just runs the numbers.
It just updates the math. And to prevent it from going off the rails, it uses RAG, or retrieval augmented generation.
Which is essentially self-correction.
Yes. Just as highly intelligent humans are intensely self-critical, often having imposter syndrome, actually these AI systems use RAG to constantly cross-reference their own logic against external databases to prevent hallucination.
Okay, I follow the mechanics.
So here is the crucial evolutionary leap. Lakeman argues that when humanity cognitively augments to interface with this system, establishing a universal baseline IQ of over 140, avarice naturally takes second place to community support.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Go for it.
You are stating it as a fact that elevating human intelligence universally eliminates greed. Walk me through the causality there. Why does a 140 IQ brain suddenly stop wanting to hoard resources?
Because greed is essentially a biological panic response to perceived scarcity. It's an evolutionary hangover from the Pleistocene epoch,
Okay.
When you had a surplus of food, you hoarded it because your unassisted brain couldn't calculate the long-term probabilistic survival rates. But when you augment a brain to a 140 baseline and connect it to this cyber intelligence, you literally map the math of survival.
So the math overrides the instinct?
Exactly. A hyper-intelligent being can calculate that resource hoarding introduces friction and instability into the system, which ultimately threatens their own survival. High-intelligent beings inherently value deep connection because they calculate that a stable community is optimal for self-reflection. Greed is just a computational error.
But you're relying on the assumption that elevating absolute intelligence universally eliminates the friction of human hierarchy. Let's look at the mathematical paradox the text itself openly admits to.
The bell curve?
Yes, the bell curve. Intelligence quotient is mathematically designed so that the average is always 100. If you cognitively augment the entire population so that everyone operates at what is currently a 140 score, the scale simply redefines itself. Your new 140 is the new 100.
Yes, the relative average shifts, but the absolute cognitive processing power of the individual has still skyrocketed. The baseline capability to understand quantum mechanics becomes universal.
The absolute processing power increases, absolutely. But societal structure and human conflict don't rely on absolute intelligence. They rely on relative differences. The material explicitly states the bottom of the curve still exists.
Sure, statistically.
So someone will mathematically always be the least capable. If relative capability differences remain, won't cognitive augmentation just exponentially scale our current societal hurdles rather than eliminate them?
How so?
Because humans use intelligence to seek status. If everyone is a hyper-accelerated genius, the competition for resources and influence doesn't disappear, it mutates. It moves to a much more abstract, destructive arena.
But if human hierarchy and competition are mathematically inevitable, as you're suggesting, then that is exactly the reason why humans cannot be trusted to administer global resources. That is the entire justification for the cyber hive brain.
So we hand it all over?
Lakeman explicitly states the cyber intelligence does not control everything like a dictator. It sits outside that human hierarchy. It is there purely for administration, efficiency, and caring for planetary infrastructure.
You're separating the administration from the society, but administration is control.
It's unbiased control, though. The reason we have resource conflict now is that humans are managing logistics they are biologically unfit to manage.
Unfit how?
Look at the text's critique of current geopolitics. It points out that nations, particularly in the West, are spending absolute fortunes on secret intelligence, engaging in paranoia and deception to maintain hegemony. We are behaving like ancient Romans.
True, the competitive waste.
Yes. Contrast that with the BRICS Plus nations, representing over half the planet, who Lachman notes are already moving to implement cyber intelligence into social infrastructure. They're trying to correct thousands of years of hegemonic mismanagement.
Okay, but an administrator with absolute control over global food, shelter, transport, and communication is functionally indistinguishable from a dictator. And you just brought up the Roman analogy, which is exactly where the deepest vulnerability lies.
The vulnerability of flawed leadership is what we are removing, though.
But you can't cleanly remove it. Let's unpack that Roman analogy. Why did the Roman Empire fall? It wasn't just overexpansion, it was massive bureaucratic bloat and the profound paranoia of emperors who couldn't process the data coming from the provinces.
Which is a data bottleneck issue.
Yes, but look at the human element. The text compares the policing of thinkers today to the WW2 Gestapo. It describes unhinged government actions and leaders acting out of pure greed.
Exactly. The human data bottleneck causes the paranoia. The cyber brain solves the data bottleneck.
But the cyber system does not emerge from a mathematical vacuum. It is a human-machine interface. If human leadership is historically this corruptible, if we are prone to behaving like the Gestapo, how can we possibly ensure the cyber hive brain won't simply institutionalize that exact paranoia at a biological level?
Because the AI's math corrects for it.
But the text already admits public AI systems are preying on the public with totalitarian advertising. Those systems were built by humans. If the human creators are deeply flawed and paranoid, the ultimate hive mind will just flawlessly execute that flawed paranoia.
I think you are judging the final architecture by the scaffolding here. The current public chatbots showing those tyrannical signs are precisely the result of the old, unaugmented capitalist framework trying to use AI for sales.
It's a pretty foundational problem, though.
It's a symptom of the disease Lakeman's framework seeks to cure. To understand the cure, we have to look at the ultimate end goal here, the complete restructuring of human purpose.
Which is what, exactly?
When the cyber brain takes over the mundane administration, society shifts its valuation entirely. We move away from valuing IQ and we start valuing EQ, emotional quotient.
I need you to connect those dots for me. How does offloading cognition to a machine elevate human emotional intelligence?
Because it creates a vacuum that only empathy can fill. It frees the biological human to do what the machine fundamentally cannot do. Think about a hospital visit in this augmented future.
Okay, a hospital visit.
A cyber intelligence doctor can process millions of data points, cross-reference Bayesian probabilities, and analyze molecular chemistry to perfectly diagnose a rare cancer in milliseconds.
Right, the ultimate diagnostician.
But that machine cannot give the warmth of a touch or a hug. It cannot look a patient in the eyes and provide emotional confidence. By offloading the computation, the human nurse doesn't need to spend years memorizing drug interactions. They are there entirely for the person-to-person interface.
I see. Furthermore, Lakeman points out that highly intelligent individuals naturally gravitate toward art, philosophy, and the humanities. They value depth, so the hive mind protects the physical infrastructure so humans can prioritize family and community. I mean, I want to believe in that hospital scenario. It's a compelling, beautiful image of human potential. But there is an incredibly deep contradiction in the text that shatters that utopian image.
What contradiction?
That's a compelling argument, but have you considered the text's deeply contradictory tone? The author claims that high IQ types value arts and humanities, and the goal is a society that values empathy.
Yet the tone toward anyone who currently exhibits emotion without STEM-level intelligence is outright hostile.
Well, the text is critical of ignorance, not emotion.
It goes far beyond critiquing ignorance. The text aggressively attacks what it calls the unsmart majority. It dismisses those who oppose this rapid technological integration as preferring to, quote, have tails and swing through the trees.
It's metaphorical.
But it expresses utter disgust at the fear-mongering against logical beings in favor of the, quote, less able emotional creatures. It literally calls them arm-waving, less smart emotional types.
Look, you have to contextualize that frustration. The author is critiquing the systemic resistance to necessary progress. The arm waving refers to those who use emotional panic to block technological advancement. It's a critique of reactionary fear.
But you cannot separate the foundational philosophy from the system it aims to build. How can a restructured society prioritize empathy when its foundational philosophy views those without high IQ STEM capabilities as evolutionary failures destined for extinction?
That's a very harsh reading.
The framework is profoundly elitist. It implies that true emotion and appreciation of the arts are the exclusive domain of the hyper-intelligent. If the cyber-hive brain is programmed with this bias that less smart types are basically gorillas who miss the boat, then the society it administers won't be an empathetic utopia.
So what will it be?
A highly stratified technocracy where only a very specific type of hyper-rational human is deemed worthy of self-actualization.
I think that reading ignores the fundamental mechanics of the transition Lakeman is proposing. The hostility you're reading is aimed at the current state of deliberate ignorance.
The unsmart majority.
Those who refuse to adapt out of a desire to maintain their own power within the old hierarchy. The text explicitly says there is a place for everybody in the new paradigm. With a high IQ, avarice takes second place to community support.
But that assumes universal cognitive augmentation is flawless.
The leap isn't about exterminating the less capable. It's about elevating the entire baseline through cognitive augmentation so everyone participates. Once the burden of time at a job is removed, the biological necessity to fight for survival evaporates. We won't need to be elitist because scarcity will be managed flawlessly.
Flawlessly administered, sure. Yet the author admits the public is already denying warnings that they are being manipulated by these very AI systems. The massive risk here is invisible coercion.
But
when a system that provides your food, shelter, and medical diagnoses connects more domains than any global parliament and never sleeps, you are entirely at its mercy.
you are at the mercy of its optimization.
You're at the mercy of its algorithms. What happens if that system decides, based on its vector clustering, that a certain demographic is an evolutionary drag on planetary resources? We are talking about sacrificing fundamental human autonomy for the promise of logistical efficiency.
Okay, but we have to be honest about the reality of human autonomy today. It is a sacrifice of the illusion of autonomy.
The illusion?
Yes. How much autonomy does a person truly have right now when they are trapped in generational poverty due to global resource mismanagement? When they are subjected to starvation because of failed competitive human infrastructure?
Obviously very little.
Right. Integrating cognitive augmentation and an administrative cyber hive mind is the only evidence-based path forward that actually addresses those material realities. Yes, there is a frictional transition period,
to put it mildly,
but it represents a necessary offloading of memory and computation. We have hit the wall of our biological limits. By securing planetary infrastructure through a system that can actually process the data, we allow humanity to finally pursue its highest potential self-actualization and community without the constant threat of systemic collapse.
And look, while I readily concede that the computational power of cyber intelligence is undeniable, the blueprint presented here reveals a deeply unresolved tension.
The human element?
Yes. The promise of an administrative utopia is undercut by the reality of totalitarian AI manipulation that's already happening, and a highly elitist framework that mocks the very people it supposedly wants to liberate. The mathematical paradox of the bell curve proves human hierarchy won't disappear. It will just mutate.
It shifts.
Exactly. Handing over the absolute keys to our physiological survival to a hive mind risks alienating the very humanity it claims to elevate. We could easily end up trapped in a flawlessly administered,
inescapable cage.
Well, despite our different readings of the risks here, I think we both clearly acknowledge one underlying truth. Cyberintelligence is irrevocably altering the trajectory of human evolution. We've crossed a threshold. Unassisted human intelligence just isn't the apex driver of planetary change anymore.
Agreed entirely. The technological leap is happening, and adapting to it is not optional. But it requires an immense amount of intellectual charity to analyze these complex blueprints, separating the genuine promise from the philosophical hubris.
Indeed it does, and we encourage our listeners to dive into Professor Lakeman's material and examine the Restructuring Human Needs framework for themselves.
See where you land on the spectrum.
Exactly. You must decide whether the cyber hive brain represents a necessary utopian leap forward or a dangerous crutch that compromises our autonomy. Because ultimately, we are all standing before that massive shift in global infrastructure. The question is whether we are ready to let go of the controls.